Hi, I'm April. I grew up on a diet of frozen meals, fish and chips on Fridays, and political activism on the weekend. We had a beautiful garden, but I never noticed the connection between food and health. I was a pretty sickly child. When I got to become a teenager and even a little bit sicker, I started to question the roots to good health. To my parents' horror, I became a little left-wing dominant. As soon as I could drive, I went to my first meeting of Friends of the Trees. I was really excited. I wore a second-hand rabbit fur coat that actually belonged to my mum. I can't say that I was well received. What I can say is that this early exposure to my committee meetings turned me completely off politics. My own activism projects include a demonstration garden, where I try to walk the talk and eat my way through. I photograph, I research, and I do drawing and designing. But at first and still now, I find I still can't draw. But I keep on trying. And I certainly couldn't afford someone who could draw. So I started creating rather crude cartoons, mixed in with a bit of humour, and this pushed me on. In fact, it was the rudest responses that kept me going. But how do we know we are being effective as activists? Possibly, we could be affective instead. Try to affect other people's feelings as well as our own. Stuart Hill, one of my mentors, is a social ecologist, and he believes in affective change, change that is motivated by our feelings. He says, put your ethics and values first, then acknowledge and work with your feelings and your passions, and this will then be refined into ideas, visions, and designs, and from there you will go into action plans and activities. One of the greatest lessons I got from an eco arts festival was the notion of ecolution by Catherine van Wilgenburg. She said, I've been transformed by this land. She suggests that people go through a process where they start out aware of the world's ills, and then they become hopeful and inspired, and they seek to be equipped, then they become empowered, and then they in turn can become supportive to other people on their journey. I've experienced a lot of changes in people's attitudes to the environment and their willingness to try something to improve our prospects. In the early years, I did a lot of what was probably illegal. Having a rooster, sheep mulching on the verge, even having a water tank was illegal at one point. I had to be brave. I'd like to show you one of my most successful images before I lose my credibility altogether. It is now published in a German textbook on rebuilding the health of soils. The way I came to this image was I asked myself, what do people want to learn? What do people want to know? And you know, the one thing I've never managed is the elevator speech on permaculture. I've never been able to put together a really great sales pitch on what is permaculture. I know what it isn't, and I know what it is, and it's very hard to express in a very short time. When we bring people to think more closely about nature and about their connections to nature through food, they're more likely to consider their impact, the true cost of their survival, and maybe participate in a positive supply chain. They're not at first going to consider the feelings and the capacity and the abilities of some of the animals in the chain. Why chooks? Why chickens? Why did I get interested in them? Why not cats and dogs? Well, cats and dogs eat meat, and chickens do need meat, but they'll often find their own. And they'll eat off meat and stuff we wouldn't dare to eat. They carry less parasites, perhaps, than humans, and they're cheaper to feed than cats and dogs. If you don't give them meat and you don't fence them in, then they have the ability to go and get most of what they need from the garden. For vegans, the poultry can still be helpful with weeding and a little bit of security. I've got geese, and wow, they give me plenty of security even when I don't want it. Backyard chickens teach children the price and the cost of a life. The chicken teaches us to care for it when it has very little regard for us. Is our adoration of the pet similar to the adoration of rare and expensive things? Do we favour things that are hard to keep in pristine condition? And do we despise those things that are common and numerous in spite of our care? Most pets have several functions. Dogs will help us hunt. Well, I don't go hunting. And they will help us defend our territory. Well, I'm not really worried. And cats will kill mice and rats, which is handy inside. And they will purr and greet us with affection. Well, actually, they're rubbing chemicals on us to tag us. But the chicken, it can do far more. It will produce eggs, weed the garden, put itself to bed, bathe itself, have chicks, and find its own food. So does that make it a pet? Or do they deserve us to love them when they don't need us in return? One of my first allegories was using the chicken as a known human subject to get people thinking about chickens' feelings. I asked myself, what do people want to know? And they seem to not understand that you don't need a rooster to get eggs. Unless you're breeding chickens, you don't really want to have a rooster. If you were a rooster and you discovered this, you'd be quite stressed. How dare I think that chickens might have feelings? It's far too radical. If we're to get chickens into the mainstream as pets, let's think about the marketing tools we could use. One of the top selling tools is sex. Well, that's not going to work. And maybe we could make them look like important figures. But personification, presenting chickens as people, doesn't always work. It can go bad. Chickens go bad, you know. Sometimes they cross the road. Not all my work has been about chickens. Sometimes I've tried to draw people and present them as very sexy beings when they're working with compost. Because seduction overrides logic. I always try to show chickens with these positive features, that they're noble, they could be cute, they're funny, quite funny actually, and they can be enchanting. I tried to show how cute chickens are, but some of them found it quite degrading. Sometimes I tried to make jokes about chickens, about how the elder, the rooster's saying, make sure you've got skinny legs because she's looking for thick thighs. This is one of my most enchanting chickens. if we look at chickens with understanding, then we build understanding about the wider environment. You have to be selective with the exposure. You have to fit the venue to your art form. Well, I'm not sure that this one worked. And quite often people think I draw children's cartoons. The subject is not always appealing to children. So it's just drawn in a childish, whimsical way. A few times I've had to explain this to ensure it's positioned correctly. And frankly, bigger isn't always better. I'm quite happy not to be famous as a chicken drawer. I've had a lot of fun. I hope that you see this and you go, I can do that.